Cyber Frontier, bringing you the latest news on the local Colorado economy and initiatives that focus on the development of cybersecurity economics. You don't have to be a computer or cybersecurity expert to get plugged in. Your host, Chris Gorog, brings it straightforward, asks the tough questions, and brings the cyber world to a level of understanding for everyone. Chris is personable and opens up with our guests on issues we all would like to see addressed. You can find us on the web at www.newcyberfrontier.com. Now join our host as he introduces the topic for today's New Cyber Frontier. All right, we are here. We're going to turn the tables a little bit on our host, who is normally the one who would be doing the interview. But because this is our very first podcast of New Cyber Frontier, we wanted to flip the tables a little bit and focus on Chris and this new podcast. And we're all very excited about it. Chris, let's talk about New Cyber Frontier and really what's it all about? What is New Cyber Frontier?
New Cyber Frontier, we looked for several and thought about several different names, but really wanted to take the approach that we in Colorado here have an economic development project that a lot of people here are very excited about. We have a big cybersecurity community, and it's really in this day and age, we need to take a different approach to cyber and cybersecurity and securing the virtual world. And we wanted to look at, as far as this podcast, how can we spin this to say, this is what's needed for the future. This is what we're doing. This is some guests we're going to interview that are experts, some people that aren't, some people that are just community leaders, some people that are just giving an opinion about what they know in the area. And New Cyber Frontier is just wrapping up the new direction I want to see cyber go as an industry in general.
Now, some people may think that when you're talking about cybersecurity, their mind is going to go right to identity theft and identity theft security and being secure through software on your computer and stuff like that. Is that anything about what we're talking about here on this podcast?
The podcast is going to be about everything you can think of right now. There's absolutely one of our episodes is about how somebody got their identity stolen and goes through how the criminals did it, and is very interesting in the fear that they have through that theft of their identity and not being able to have control. But then we talk to some government leaders about how we're spending money in Colorado Springs, how we're going to bring jobs into the area. And we talk to some experts about, hey, how do we give guidance for what is needed and what maybe didn't work in the past? I know a lot of my questions go into really grilling people about, hey, you're going down a direction. That is something we've tried here, here, and here, and it doesn't work because of this. Maybe we should think about that.
Are we talking about software development, or are we talking about things that actually go behind the scenes with cybersecurity? Explain the challenges that we're dealing with in the cyber world right now.
In the cyber world right now, we have a big kind of divide happening where the first thing you talked about is your identity, your privacy. But then on the other side, we have these big companies that make billions of dollars from multiple people's information.
So you're talking about aggregators?
Yes, we're talking about the Googles, the Facebooks that have all the information from all kinds of people. And what you think about what they're doing with that information is secondary to your ability to use the platform to do your social or do your search or whatever you're doing online. But yet the industry is developing in this separation where there's a big question about how is individuals' privacy going to be handled going forward. And why are we having all these big data breaches that people think, they don't have my information, and you realize, wait a minute, I went through a Target, I swiped my card, they absolutely do have my information. Why do they have my information?
We'll be right back with the rest of today's show right after these brief messages from our sponsors. Cyber Resilience Institute helps build strong cyber communities designed to prevent members from attack. Like building a neighborhood watch, it takes coordination and a sharing community to protect our identities and valuables in the virtual world. Typically, we hear that organizations know they need to do something to protect their cyber assets, but don't know where to begin. Let Cyber Resilience Institute help your community create an action plan. Cyber Resilience Institute will build your community or business marketplace so that it is designed to support a collective cyber defense. Contact them for more information at cyberresilienceinstitute.org.
There's a big question about how is individuals' privacy going to be handled going forward? And why are we having all these big data breaches that people think, they don't have my information, and you realize, wait a minute, I went through a Target, I swiped my card, they absolutely do have my information. Why do they have my information?
Right, and I think some of the challenge is that different companies, because they get a lot of press and they advertise a lot, they've led us to believe that identity theft is someone stealing our credit card and using it in the United States, where actually it's a lot bigger of a problem than that. It's about our medical identity, and it's about our Social Security number. It's about our criminal history. It's about someone hiding behind your name and your good name and committing crimes and things like that. And it's really it's kind of a global thing now, isn't it? I mean, it's a lot bigger than what we perceive it to be.
Yeah, and imagine you call your bank and they say there's a password on your account, confirm it, and you say, okay, here's what my password is, and they say, no, that's not right. Well, what happened? It changed. And they say, I'm sorry, sir, we can't. We have to protect our customers' privacy. We can't give you anything from this bank. And you're like, wait a minute, this is me, and I can't get any information from my bank. And you find out that somebody else is you in every virtual sense, and you cannot get back to having these companies who don't know you at all know that that's you.
Yeah, there's this virtual you out there that you might not even be introduced to yet. You might not even know you exist.
Well, it's somebody else and these aren't, a lot of times they're groups, or just petty criminals. But identity theft is only one piece. When you look at what we're doing in the cyber industry, I've been involved with international standards groups where they're trying to make what is needed in the cyber world. We have this duality between big companies that make lots of money that are okay with the status quo in a lot of ways, except for when they lose information and whoops. And then we have people saying, why is this happening? And this divide. But what's going on is who would fund and pay for a solution that helps the average person if the big company makes money by having all their information?
Well, let's talk about this a little bit. Who should be listening to this podcast? Who are we? Who do you want to hear the information that you have?
Okay, so I there's a couple different people that I think would really benefit, but literally everybody who hears the word cybersecurity, and especially in the Colorado Springs area, and even connected to the rest of the world in cyber, that says, I am tired of all the things I've heard. I'm tired of always hearing how everything's falling apart. There's a new hack here every day. There's a new breach. This company didn't do something. I want to know what's going on with my privacy. But at the same time, I'm interested to know, how can we grow our local community on it? So we're looking for people who say, this is the future of the world. We want to be a part of it because we're designing an economic development project in Colorado around cybersecurity and trying to make that in this area be the center of the world as far as going forward into the technological age.
Now, are people like, let's say, people like you and me who are doing internet radio or doing podcasts all the time, should we be concerned about cybersecurity? Is that a challenge for us? I mean, because I almost feel like what you're doing through your podcast is very cutting edge and very current and moving that style of communication out front. I mean, the airwaves are changing and people are getting information differently. So is there a challenge for you and I in what we're doing with our broadcasts and podcasts?
You know, in the virtual world, you have to decide whether to be a player or sit on the sidelines. And if you want to participate in today's business age, today's experts branding, to people to know you, to be a leader in the future, you have to do it virtually. And right now, it's a big, we'll say, that's why I call it the new cyber frontier. It's a frontier. Just like when they explored the Americas and people were coming over from all different countries and it was a free-for-all and the law and order was questionable and the ability to even know what was going on was questionable.
Yeah, one of my biggest fears, and maybe it's a part of this, is I want the internet to be safe, but I don't want the internet to be regulated. I don't want a federal or a government entity getting their fingers into the internet. I do not want that. I'll never want that. If there's a vote, I will vote against it every time. It's none of their business. They'll muck it up. How do we? Is it something that a private entity could do, or does it have to eventually end up being the gateway that our government gets their mitts in it?
And you hit the exact kind of pretense of everything we're doing here. And I call it the cybersecurity ecosystem. Cybersecurity is a socio-technological problem because everybody's privacy is at stake. Big organizations, companies make money from lots of individuals' privacy. Governments desire to kind of keep it under control, to have their hooks into it. That this whole effort is really, and that's why being under the wing of a social community's economic development effort is really powerful, because we can take what's needed in cybersecurity is to develop it for the general good of the average person for their privacy. I've been on 4 different international standards efforts, and every single one of them was organized by big companies and governments. And the interest faded away after the money that the government spent went away. And people came in with the same thing you're saying. They sat there and listened to a big company with a vested interest in owning everybody's privacy, and a government with a vested interest in have access to everybody's privacy, and sat there and said, wow, I'm just not sure. I'm not sure that this is the right direction. Right. But we take a cyber ecosystem approach where we say, let's build a community of everybody who wants to work, from the corporate status to the individuals to the elected officials, on just using it as a way to make money in a general area by having business. We don't have to be under the wing of a company that has a vested interest, or even the question of, the questionable thing that Edward Snowden showed us is how much there's some political questions that need to be answered about what government's involvement is.
Yeah, very true. And the thing that just came to my mind is how many businesses and how many companies are going paperless now, and they're storing their documents in the cloud, and who owns that piece of the cloud, and how secure are your documents being stored? A whole lot of different questions come to mind, but I certainly don't want there to be a government involvement where, because they know what's better for us, to start securing all this stuff, because once someone has secure or access to securing, they also have access to entry.
Yeah, that's the age-old question. And that's who should be interested in this podcast. We are talking about that divide. We are talking honestly and openly about what is the role of these different entities and how everybody can be interested in this, and how we can bring it down to a level that everybody can understand, and not just technical cyber experts that talk a lingo that sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher. Wah, 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 wah. We're really trying. And when I interview these people, they mention acronyms and things that are very industry specific. I'm like, no, wait, go back. You have to explain what that is before we can go on, because we're trying to bring cybersecurity to a level of understanding for everybody.
We'll be right back with the rest of today's show right after these brief messages from our sponsors. Cyber Resilience Institute helps build strong cyber communities designed to prevent members from attack. Like building a neighborhood watch, it takes coordination and a sharing community to protect our identities and valuables in the virtual world. Typically, we hear that organizations know they need to do something to protect their cyber assets, but don't know where to begin. Let Cyber Resilience Institute help your community create an action plan. Cyber Resilience Institute will build your community or business marketplace so that it is designed to support a collective cyber defense. Contact them for more information at cyberresilienceinstitute.org. Do you think that it will end up being each individual's responsibility within their own participation, whether it's through their own laptop or their own media devices or their own things? You know what I'm saying? Like will it be something that I do from my end, or is it something that's always going to be out in the cloud that, is being somehow governed or controlled on our behalf?
Now, we hope to empower with the efforts that would develop an ecosystem for cybersecurity, the individuals to have access to their own security and their own privacy.
I'm going to stop you before I forget. Describe to me an ecosystem for cybersecurity.
Okay. So if we look at our local area economy, we have government, we have private industry, we have education, we have schools, we have different private industries. All these different things come together to one area might make products for another. One makes consumer products. One sells products in a store. But all these things in a local economy make up an ecosystem. In our world, in cybersecurity, there's so many different products and things you can buy, but you don't know which one works together with what and what are they doing. So an ecosystem is putting them all together, not in terms of they have to work together, but just where does one end and the next begin? What products do what for you? So right now, if you buy
are you talking about digital products, or are you talking about solid state products, things that I would buy on Amazon or something like that, or are you talking more in the digital world?
And really, cybersecurity has to connect. And I always say the definition of cybersecurity is implementing the things in the virtual world and controlling them and enforcing them that we now already know how to do in the physical world. So for every physical thing we control with things that actually exist in front of us, there has to be an equivalent counterpart for cybersecurity in the virtual world. So if we police and we don't let bad guys speed on the networks, we also have a policing mechanism for our infrastructure and our communications and a way to monitor what people are doing and enforce it. If we have a restriction for what people sell you in a physical products or what's in your food, we also have to have some way of understanding what that equivalent is for virtual products. So cybersecurity is the controlling of all the things that we know in our current physical world, making an equivalent in the virtual environment, and all those things interconnecting to make a control structure that we're used to. And for an example, look at your highway systems. Everybody knows to drive on the right-hand side of the road. Everybody knows how to navigate intersections, stoplights, signs. Everybody has their speed restriction. Everybody knows how to get around and navigate the roads and get to where they want to go. That infrastructure, basically that standard set of common accepted behaviors doesn't exist in the virtual world yet.
Do you think that some of these things are just become self-evident over time?
Absolutely. But at some point in time, when all the cars started hitting the road back in the early 1900s, they realized that there has to be a standard set of which side of the road you drive on after a couple head-on collisions, I'm sure. And that whole standard thing now has developed over time, is similar across all the states, and we look at it as it's just there. Whenever it wasn't there, there was a lot of problems, the same that we're having in the virtual world.
So it seems to me that there needs to be some real conversation on who gets to make those decisions, who gets to decide what the rules are. And that could really lead to some dangerous ground.
Yes. And that's what, when I say ecosystem, it's putting all the players together that make and control and govern all these different parts of the virtual world to kind of, I always use the example of make a puzzle of the whole virtual landscape, but we're not defining the pieces, we're defining the lines. We need to know how we all connect without having to get into everybody's business of how they implement and design their puzzle piece, just how the little lines go between where they connect to the next part of the world.
So are you going to be able to, through your website or through email or something, are people going to be able to enter into the conversation, even if they're not being interviewed, but maybe through sending you an email or posting an idea, or is there going to be some kind of interaction like that?
Absolutely. As we post episodes, we'll post them in our blog section so that you'll have the ability to write comments and write what you think about, maybe even what questions didn't get asked, what you need to know, what you'd like to know from certain people, and hopefully we'll build an interaction back and forth. So that's the objective here, is to have everybody's input from the community. And we're starting out by interviewing the community leaders. So you'll see in the next episode, it goes through just a little short introduction of a good portion of our interviewees, starting with the governor of the state of Colorado. We went into a lot of the founding members of the efforts, a lot of the leaders in our universities, our city leaders, our government officials, a lot of the generals in the military entities around Colorado Springs that are participating in how this will be connected, and a lot of industry experts that have already been through exercises like this and have input on how to make this effort a success. And you'll hear me ask that same thing in almost every interview, is what makes this a success in your mind? And it's amazing the different responses you get from it.
Well, let's circle back around, and why don't you tell us a little bit about you, what your background is, and why this topic is of such interest to you.
Yeah, so I am we'll say 25-year plus engineer. I started out in nuclear engineering, ran a reactor plant in the Navy for quite a few years, and then got out of there and went into working in factories and all the automation that happens, robotics, tons of product lines, things like that, as well as some very high-tech implementations of that in semiconductors and things. And then spent quite a few years developing the software pieces of it, and then pulling those together in the cybersecurity aspect. My expertise is in cryptographic key management, which means the mathematics behind cybersecurity and what makes it all work together. I have 2 master's degrees in business and in cybersecurity, and kind of spend a lot of time pulling those together. And so how does our world in the business environment, the social aspects of it too, and then the technology pieces all come together? That's really where my passion is. And that's why, and I've done that with cybersecurity over the years, just kind of migrated to the point where, okay, if you're in I've been in executive management in a lot of high level areas in business that I was involved with a lot of conversations about how does the business operate? How is the data managed? How are the people managed? And so often those were all separate, different conversations. So bringing that together, the socio-technological aspect of new cyber frontier, is what we're focusing on here.
Just one last question, and then we'll kind of start wrapping up a little bit. But did you find that as the cyber world was becoming more vast, that your interest in that area started kind of growing along with that? Or was it something that you've always been, did you see the writing on the wall before the internet and the cyber world is what it is today?
You know, I always say it was 1998, the first time I was involved with cybersecurity. I was in a factory, and the mine safety MSA administration had called us in, and I was the technician that went there to fix a problem. And they had big black mark on the wall where they had a big explosion, and one of their pieces of factory equipment, it was a plasma cutter, had been started by somebody putting a script to run it in the execute folder from the factory control room, from the engineering room, which was in another building. And they forgot to put an arc command in there to light the gas that was coming out. So big gas ball built up, and it lit off the one next to it. Luckily, no one got killed. No one was even hurt because they saw it happening and everybody bailed out. But it wasn't even called cybersecurity back then. It was fix this problem that's a mine safety problem that we have to have resolved before we can let this factory reopen, because they can do this in several machines. And now we would call that cybersecurity, virtual operations across a network that have operations and control physical, real world type of devices,
which is very common these days.
Yeah. So, and after, for several years of working that, got all the way into design engineering, where I was developing computer chips that implemented cryptographic, so the encryption, decryption algorithms and stuff. And you asked me if it was always the writing on the wall. So I just kind of flowed into it because not too many people understood it. I was the one that solved the major problems at the companies I worked for, and that was a major problem. So I remember just kind of rolling into it. And then at one point in my career, I actually got to the point where I said, I'm done with this stuff. Nobody wants to solve this problem. Nobody really cares unless it affects their money until they have an explosion, which is, so many people predict that we're going to have a major web problem from cybersecurity before there's a wake-up call. And I'm hoping that that's not the case. But
what do you think that might look like?
I don't even want to talk about that. No, I'm joking about that. I don't even want my mind to go there, because the types of things that I see working, we've recently worked in a lot of threat intelligence, partnership with the National Guard for the Olympics, and watching some things. And I've been privy to a lot of types of attacks that happen in different areas of the world. And the things that people have been able to get in the background of nuclear power plants, infrastructures of whole countries. And with my background in critical infrastructure, and that example I told you of my first accident I was exposed to, now that was just an accident. That was just somebody doing something that wasn't, they didn't think was a problem, and they made a mistake and they put it in the wrong folder. And they made a mistake and forgot to arc it as part of the command structure. If it would have just started executing and it would have arced, it would just start cutting. Everybody would have walked away and said, that was kind of weird. This happened without us doing anything. But knowing what I know about infrastructure and these ability for some people to get involved, the risk and the possibility of what could go wrong, I don't even want to talk about. We're talking about Chernobyl's and accidents like you saw in Japan during a tsunami, with the ability for people to get in. And the biggest thing that's sometimes even bigger, than, you have a loss of life and you have dangerous things. But right now, the ability to shut down a city, a geographical region, and the economic and the, we'll say the disorder, the chaos.
Is that really possible? Or is that sci-fi stuff?
In last week, working with the National Guard, we were talking and debriefed on an instance where they actually did this in an Eastern European country.
Oh my goodness! Well, let's in the next 2 minutes wrap us up with where can we expect to find new material. How often is your podcast going to be available? And can people get on some kind of a notification list of when the new podcasts come out?
Absolutely. All those. newcyberfrontier.com, also .news and .co, but it's easier to find .com and people remember that. So newcyberfrontier.com is the direct access to the site. It is hosted on Logic Central. And when you go to the page, there's a prompt. You can get on the mailing list, and we'll keep you updated on when we come out with episodes. Right now, we have pre-recorded a whole season that is about 8 months, and you'll see those releases every week. But we also plan to have some in-betweens where you'll see updates on news and things that come out, because we're connected to all these things as they develop. So anytime we get some news releases, we'll probably come out with a bi-weekly and keep everybody up to date. And that's why we need you on the mailing list, so we can let you know, hey, there's something else come out you might want to check out.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Chris, and we wish you the best of luck with New Cyber Frontier.
Thanks a lot.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of New Cyber Frontier. Remember to get involved. Often we think that someone else will handle privacy and security in the virtual world, but you are the only one truly in command of your virtual fate. Join our mailing list so we can keep you informed of breaking news and new releases. If you have an idea, if you have a question that you would like to hear answered, or if you want to get involved with our efforts, reach out to us at newcyberfrontier.com. We also encourage you to visit our sponsors' links, as they are the ones that really make this show possible. I want to thank each of you for supporting the show, and we look forward to seeing you back for the next episode of New Cyber Frontier.